Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Welcome to 2024. This is the first solo episode of the year. And for this year, or at least for the next few months, we're going to see how this works out. We're taking a new approach to my solo episodes at the suggestion and behest of, well, I'm going to say it's Chelsea's suggestion, but it's also mine. I'm inviting Chelsea Morrow to my podcast. She is my podcast producer. So let's start by saying welcome to the show, Chelsea. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a series of episodes which are not solo. They're actually a conversation or an interview between Chelsea and I. I'm kind of on the other side of the mic. And Chelsea's going to ask me some questions on a variety of topics. And we're going to also invite you guys, once you've listened to, anytime you listen to an episode, if there's something you want us to lean into or dig into, or you have questions, whether it's about something we're talking about or something else, then leave it in the comments, because we're going to be planning out a whole year of these. And at the end of the day, we're here for you. So let's get started. So today's episode, because it's 2024, we resisted the temptation of talking about resolutions. And instead, what we're going to talk about is, what are we talking about, Chelsea? What did we end up deciding? We had this big conversation.
Well, we're going to talk about how to actually eat more nutrient dense. So instead of just saying, let's eat more nutrient dense, we're going to look at what that actually looks like, what to avoid, and what to do instead. So you don't just have a list of things to avoid, you have things to include.
100%. And also with we started off our conversation before this episode talking about, well, how are we going to help people to improve their gut health? And so, which is what led us down this path of eating a more nutrient dense diet. And as we're talking about eating a more nutrient dense diet, it's like, okay, well, just telling people to eat a more nutrient dense diet is not super helpful. So why don't we start on this journey and talk about what are 5 things we should probably cut out and 5 things we can include instead. And then there's going to be a couple of pro tips at the end. So let's just launch and see where we go.
Yeah. So the first thing that you added to your list for things that we should avoid in 2024 is processed oils. So can you talk to us about that?
100%. So a lot of you guys have seen or heard people talking about good fats and bad fats, right? So it's, at the end of the day, what we know is that processed seed and vegetable oils tend to be less healthy for our body. The other thing is, if we're going to, once we start eliminating things like seed oils and vegetable oils, so now I'm talking about canola oil, vegetable oil, corn oil, anything, soybean, safflower, exactly.
Sunflower.
Once we start eliminating these oils from our diet, we automatically start pulling out processed foods, because that's really where we find them. So most of the time, if you're eating food that's out of a box or a bag or one of these prepared dressings, once you start reading the ingredients, that's where you're going to start to see these ingredients pop up. So this is your invitation to read the ingredients. Once you start to see something that is not extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil, obviously, with the animal fats, you're not going to find them so much in liquid form, but you'll find things like animal fats is going to be butter, ghee, tallow, duck fat. What am I missing, Chelsea? I think those are the main ones, probably. Once you're not seeing those and you're seeing things like what we just listed earlier, that's your invitation to kind of step away. If you're one of these people that doesn't like to make their own salad dressings, I'm going to tell you that I personally love making my own salad dressings. It's the whole point of eating a salad, as far as I'm concerned, is that I get to eat dressing. But if you're one of these people that really struggles with making your own for whatever reason, then I'm going to plug a brand here because I know it and I love it. It's called Primal Kitchen. They use avocado oil in their dressings. They don't add sugar. They don't add a lot of nasty stuff. You can recognize all the ingredients in the label.
Yeah, I'm personally obsessed with their salad dressing. I love their Greek. Their Greek dressing is I could eat that all day, every day.
Yeah, no, I love a lot of their dressings actually. So if I'm going to get a store-bought dressing, it's going to be theirs. So
yeah. But I think it's pretty shocking. Like when you go to Whole Foods, you think that everything is healthy there. And once you start looking at the ingredients, 95% of the things found out in Whole Foods have processed oils in it. But maybe something that you can dive into is why the processed oils are something we want to avoid. What is it doing to our health, and why should we eliminate it?
yeah, so I think what ends up happening is, for starters, think about your body as MacGyver. That was an old TV show. MacGyver was this guy, he could be in a nuclear reactor while it was melting down. If you gave him a piece of chewing gum and a paperclip, he would fix the nuclear reactor. And think of your body as a MacGyver. MacGyver would take whatever was on hand and use it. It might be imperfect and it might not hold long term, but it would kind of do the trick. Your body is the same when it comes to fats. And so you need fat for your brain, you need fat for your cell membranes, you need fat for like really critical processes in the body. But what fat your body has access to is going to really determine the function and the health of your system. So if you provide your body with these seed oils and vegetable oils that fundamentally don't suit what you really need, you're going to be stuck with cell membranes that are maybe a bit stiff. So they're not going to be able to function properly. So they won't be. And, the cell membrane, a lot of people would say, is the brain of the cell. It determines what comes in and what goes out. And once that cell membrane starts to get stiff, it can't function well anymore. So at a very foundational level, providing improper fats to your body is going to make it hard for your cell membranes to be functional. Also, your brain is mostly fat.
And what about the omega-6s and inflammation?
100%. So, one thing I want to clarify on omega-6 is you need omega-6 to be healthy, right? You need omega-6 to live. And omega-6 gets demonized all the time, but that's really because in the North American diet, or let's say in Western diets in general, we're way overweighted on the omega-6 and underweighted on omega-3. And so
I think you had an episode with Omega Quant where they said that Americans have a 40-to-1 ratio rather than a 4-to-1 or 1-to-1.
Yeah, 100%. As a matter of fact, in Japan, they once did a study, and I don't know if this is true anymore. This is what's interesting is as the world gets smaller, different countries adopt other countries' ways of eating. But in a traditional Japanese diet, they would find that omega-6 to omega-3 ratio was closer to 2-to-1, omega-6 to omega-3. And at that time, they had lower rates of depression than almost any other country. So we have to remember that, first of all, different types of omega-6 might be more, definitely anything that's deep fried is going to be a damaged fat. So never mind that it's not a good fat, it's going to be damaged. So that's going to drive inflammation right out of the gate. So definitely the type of omega-6, like omega-6 that you're going to get from raw nuts is not going to be as bad as omega-6 you're going to get from deep fried French fries, for example. Yeah. Right. But at the same time, we need to up our intake of omega-3 while we reduce our intake of omega-6. And because omega-6 is so prevalent in so many different foods, the minute that you start to take those processed foods out, you start to correct that balance again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that for me personally, once I eliminated the processed oils, I saw a huge decrease in inflammation. That was really the main driving factor. Okay, so great. Do you want to sum that up with what we want to then focus on?
Okay, so we want to focus on healthy fats and get rid of the unhealthy fats. So to focus on the healthy fats, let's make sure that we prioritize things like avocados, olives, avocado oil, extra virgin olive oil, egg yolks that are not cooked, meaning sunny side up. You're going to get better nutrition out of an egg yolk that's runny than out of a cooked egg yolk. You're going to get better nutrition from fat from cold water fatty fish, grass-fed beef. What am I missing here, Chelsea? I think those are the main. Oh, coconut oil. Now, on the saturated fat, like not to go down too deep in another wormhole, but when it comes to saturated fat, and these are the fats that are solid at room temperature. So these are things like coconut fat and your animal fats, like ghee, butter, that kind of stuff. Some saturated fat is going to be great. It depends. I'm not going to get into the details now. Maybe we'll do a whole episode on this one day. But overdoing saturated fat, if you haven't addressed the rest of your diet, definitely can be an issue. And there's some genetic predispositions that might make saturated fat less good for you than the next person. So if in the absence of real clarity here, let's be modest on the saturated fat intake and let's keep it to those healthier, like Mediterranean diet type fats, because that Mediterranean diet just keeps coming up over and over again as a really good choice. My caveat there is be careful on how people define the Mediterranean diet, because sometimes it includes a whole lot of grains and starches and stuff, and that's when it starts to go off the rails. But again, I digress.
Yes. Okay, great. So let's move on to number 2, which is we need to avoid added sugars. So talk to us about that.
Yeah. So the sugar monster, we all know, it's a defining feature of, again, Western diets where we've really lost the plot here. And I'm going to come out and say, sugar is not necessarily the devil's. It wasn't born the devil's food, right? Sugar, the sweet taste, ancestrally defined to us foods that were not toxic necessarily, right? The problem is that we love sweet and we crave sweet. And the more sweet we get, the more sweet we want. And we've moved into a world where everything is sweetened. Right. I talked to so many people who can't stand anything that has any bitterness to it. Like they won't eat arugula because it's bitter. They don't like grapefruit because they say it's bitter. They don't like sour. They keep going for the sweet, the sweet, the sweet. And it's gotten us into a ton of trouble because as a result, all these packaged goods companies just sweeten everything because they know that sweet is going to get us to eat more of it. And that sweet taste flips a switch in our brain and says, eat more. And as a result,
even like pasta sauce, salad dressings, like things that you don't even think would have sugar in it, they're putting sugar in it.
100%. Like sugar. And, a chef will say to you, well, we use a little bit of sugar in dressing to balance the dressing. But there's a difference between putting in half a teaspoon or a tiny bit of raw honey or maple syrup into a dressing versus just adding a bunch of sugar or there's a GMO sugar from beets that they use. And so, so what happens is that our taste, think of it as your taste buds becoming corrupted, like a corrupted file on your computer, where all they want is sweet, and you lose the ability to enjoy food that is not overly sweetened. And the challenge with with excess sugar, of course, is that it's aging because it drives AGEs in your body. It drives these blood sugar spikes and drops, which makes you feel cranky and tired and like you got to eat and then you're going to die. And then you got to eat and then you're going to die.
And then you gain weight and you're inflamed and leads to
and you can't function.
Disorder.
And you lose your metabolic flexibility. So you lose your ability for your body to flip between sugar burning and fat burning. When you don't have sugar on board, you should be able to flip into accessing your stored fat for fuel. And we lose that ability because we lose what's called our metabolic flexibility. So there's a laundry list of reasons why we want to take steps to reduce our excess sugar intake.
So how about sugar alternatives like stevia and monk fruit? Is that something that we should be using instead of sugar? Is that actually a healthier option for us?
So yes and no, right? So I love that you use the word sugar optional sugars because stevia and monk fruit are not artificial. So it's not like saccharin or what's the other one? Starts aspartame.
Yeah.
Right. So those I would say are damaging to the gut. They've got all kinds of problems. So we definitely want to stay away from those artificial ones. But when it comes to monk fruit and stevia, they're better in some ways than sugar, but they're also not better in some ways than sugar. Number one, they're a little bit better because they shouldn't spike your blood sugar, in theory. The problem is that sometimes the other ingredients they're combined with will spike your blood sugar. And a perfect food example of this, and I'm sorry, you guys, for picking on you, but because it was such a disappointment in my life, I am going to. Smart Sweets gummies are, their whole mandate is this is a healthier candy for you. There's only 3 grams of sugar in a whole bag. You can eat the whole bag. It's safe because there's no sugar. We use only natural sugar sweeteners. So the bad news is I'm a gummy virtual addict if I let myself. And when I found these candies, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to, like, this is it. This is my solution. I can just eat these, which was great until the day. Well, 2 things. One is I would eat a bag and I would notice that I felt pretty crappy afterwards. And that didn't make sense to me. I'm like, well, I shouldn't feel horrible, kind of nauseous and unwell if these are really good for me. So the next step I took, which is one of our pro tips we'll talk at the end, is I happened to get my hands on a continuous glucose monitor. So I put a continuous glucose monitor, and to my horror, I noticed that eating my Smart Sweets was going to spike my blood sugar, even though they're sweetened with things like stevia or monk fruit. And so it turns out that there were other ingredients in there that were spiking my blood sugar. So at the end of the day, if the food spikes your blood sugar, it doesn't matter what's doing it. And it doesn't matter if it's monk fruit or stevia. The other thing about monk fruit and stevia and natural sweeteners, and this even goes for honey and maple syrup, like raw honey, maple syrup, you have to know yourself. And if you know that by eating sweet things, it just makes you crave more sweet things, if it gives a signal to your brain, there's sugar on board, this should mean a lot of calories, and so it leaves you craving more, then probably it's not the right answer for you. And go ahead.
And one thing for me, I noticed that once I cut out the sugar alternatives, I wasn't bloated anymore. So I was putting stevia in my coffee, in my protein smoothies, or I was having like the green powders, like that has monk fruit or stevia in it. And I realized that when I'm using that, I'm like so bloated instantly. And I wasn't making the connection for a while until I was in France. I didn't have stevia. They weren't using it there. I forgot to bring some. And then I just wasn't bloated at all. And I was like, okay, well, I guess this is what we do now.
Well, and so noticing other digestive symptoms is a big deal. Like it's not going to bloat everybody, but it definitely bloated you, right? And so I think that understanding how these things affect you, both from a physical perspective, like bloating, headache, tiredness, whatever the case may be, and from a craving perspective is really important. And so what I invite my clients to do is, what if we cut out any artificial or added sugar or sweetener for 30 days? And so we are going to be, I'm not a proponent of being draconian for long periods of time, but what if for a 30-day period we were draconian and all we ate were natural vegetables, meats, natural fats, maybe some berries at the most, right? And what ends up happening, and people can find this really hard, because they find that they don't enjoy the taste of food as much, because your taste buds think of your taste buds as being calibrated to a much higher level of sweet. But what this ended up doing over 30 days is it recalibrates your taste buds. And now all of a sudden, when you eat an apple or some berries or even a carrot, it tastes much sweeter to you. And to your point, like you were telling me earlier, when you went to France and you learned to drink your coffee without stevia and just with some milk, you realized, wow, like this is sweet enough for me. And when you tried to go back to adding stevia, it was almost too sweet.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've done it before where I just cut out sugar. And obviously at first you have some cravings you have to get through, but then you get to a point where then you eat your dinner and then you don't crave something sweet after. You know,
Yeah.
it's like you just don't have the cravings anymore. Or if you have like this whole plate of like, you know, through the holidays, you have all these sweets and
Yeah.
cookies and everything in front of you. Like you can eat one or two and just feel like, okay, yeah, that's great. You don't feel the need to like overindulge on it through the holidays, I feel like.
Yeah. And that's very true. And it will depend on the person. So this moves into the work of someone I read this book that was really interesting. I can't remember the name of the book, but the author's name is Gretchen Rubin. And in this book, she talked about, are you an abstainer or a moderator? And abstainers are people that if they can't have one piece of chocolate or one cookie, because the minute they have that one, that gateway drug, if you will, they can't stop anymore. They just have to eat the whole box or the whole bag or the whole package. Versus, so for them, they need to just not eat those sweets. If they want to stay away from them, don't have them in the house and just don't eat them. And then you don't crave them. The moderator is a different type of person. The moderator, if you tell the moderator you can't have chocolate or you can't have fruit or whatever, pick your poison, they obsess about it incessantly. If they have one little bite or one little piece, if they have one square of chocolate, they're happy. That's all they need. Right. So, and you could be an abstainer or a moderator you could be an abstainer for one food and a moderator for a different food. Right. So this all comes down to knowing yourself and understanding how you respond to different types of foods. And when it comes to sweets, people know. Like, you know what, you guys, if you sit and think about it for a minute, you know what camp you're in.
But honestly, I used to be someone who couldn't just have one bite and had to eat it all. And once I cut sugar out of my diet and kind of reset, now I'm the type of person that can just have one bite and feel satisfied. So I think you can train yourself.
No, 100%. It also may have to do with your gut microbiome, right? We know definitely. Like our microbiome can itself drive cravings. And there's a possibility that when you did your work, you were able to rebalance your microbiome. You have a better balance of gut bugs. And so guys that are driving the sugar cravings are not as prevalent as maybe they were.
Yeah, I think that's 100% what it was. Okay, great. So basically our strategy for what to do instead for sugar is just more so test out going without sugar, would you say?
Well, consider going without it for a period of time. See how you do, right? And then on the other side, once you've done that reboot, once you've recalibrated your taste buds, let's not demonize sugar. Right. As long as you're able to be moderate about it. If understand that if you're the type of person that all of a sudden the minute, like it's a slippery slope, right? And so you start to bring sugar back and next thing you know, it's a lot or medium. And then it's, like you can't control it. Then you understand that about yourself. But for other people, and for most of us, we should be able once in a while to indulge in a sweet or whatever the case may be. And then have that not throw us completely off the rails. So that we don't demonize, we don't become super rigid. We don't develop that thing called orthorexia where you're obsessed with only eating certain foods. We want to build that flexibility and that resilience in our systems that 80% of the time we do what we know we need to do. And that allows us 20% of the time to be more flexible. Some people need it to be a 90-10 rule. It just depends on your circumstances and your health. Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's move on to number 3, which the third thing we want to eliminate or reduce in 2024 is dairy, but it's a little bit of a gray area. So let's talk about, should everyone eliminate dairy, or what does that actually look like?
Okay. So this is where my favorite word comes into play, and it's nuance, which is another way of saying it depends. All right.
Mhm.
So number one, quality of dairy overrides everything else. If you're going to consume any dairy, make sure that it's good quality dairy. It's, if possible, you're using raw milk products if you can get access to them. In Toronto, in Canada, where I live, we have access to whole milk that is unpasteurized. Non-homogenized.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly enough, just non-homogenous. So not homogenizing milk means they make it that it stays, that the fat stays in the milk. Like you don't get that plug of fat at the top of the bottle. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, when we homogenize milk and I don't actually fully remember what the process is for homogenation, but basically when they homogenize milk, your body doesn't recognize the food as a whole food, and it has a negative effect on your body. So if you're going to drink whole milk, if at all possible, try to make sure that it's from grass-fed cows. And those products are becoming much more widely available now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if at all possible, try to get non-homogenized. And if you're in a place where you can find raw, that's even better. Okay. So
even at Whole Foods, sorry, I'll just keep talking about Whole Foods, but they have a big selection now of like raw cheese. Like it's starting to become more mainstream. One question I do have is they have A1, A2 milk. Is that raw or what is that exactly?
I think that has to do with the type of cow.
The type of
cow. It affects the type of protein in the milk. And some people tolerate different proteins better. So I think you know what, let's dig into that in another episode. I'm not up on my A1, A2 facts right now, but definitely that speaks to the type of protein and fat in the milk based on the cow. And there's a lot of work in that area that shows that for different people, it has different benefits. So quality of protein is quality of milk definitely is going to override everything else. But the second thing that is equal to that is what is your physiological response to milk? And the only way I have found to figure that out, so there's two ways. One, have milk when you're having your dairy. Oh my God, that thumbs up thing. When you're eating your dairy, whenever you're consuming dairy, how do you feel? And I will say this, for most of us, we normalize how we feel. So if you've been consuming dairy for years and years and years, I can almost guarantee that if you're having a symptom from dairy, you may not realize it's from the dairy. So you may have normalized feeling bloated or feeling inflamed or feeling groggy or whatever that symptom is. Almost the only way to figure it out is to cut out dairy. Again, eliminate it for, sometimes it's just a week, right? But a week, 2 weeks, ideally for 30 days, and then reintroduce it. And that is when I get people who have these massive aha moments that are like, oh my God, I had no idea how bloated I was until I stopped consuming. And this can go for any number of foods, but definitely dairy is one of them.
Yeah. I mean, well, Dr. Mark Hyman, he says that 75% of people are lactose intolerant without realizing it. I don't know the truth in that, but it is interesting. But for me, I couldn't eat dairy for the longest time. And then I started to reintroduce it. And now I can eat it, but only when I notice a difference between if I'm eating raw cheese at home, that's a great snack. It makes me feel good. But like I told you earlier, I went out for pizza last night, and obviously that's low quality dairy. This morning, I don't feel good. So I think also that's a nuanced part of it but cutting out dairy, it helped me reset my gut. So then I can then handle it. So it doesn't have to be like before, I thought it was like a lifelong thing. Like, oh, now I have to live my whole life without eating dairy. But now I realize like, oh no, I just needed to reset and then be pickier about what type of dairy.
100%. A lot of people who listen to my podcast will have heard me talk about this before. And that is, I did a gut reset with Joel Green. I could not eat I couldn't consume whey protein before I did that. There's a number of foods I couldn't consume, but whey protein was one of them. And ever since I did that reset, I'm able to have whey protein shakes. So, it's rebalancing addressing the gut microbiome may have a huge impact on your ability to tolerate dairy along with other types of foods, but definitely to understand how your body responds to dairy. When first look at your quality of dairy, but really do that experiment, cut it out for a period of time to see how you feel without it. And then reintroduce your dairy foods one at a time. So some people can eat yogurt, but can't drink milk. Some people can have certain types of cheese, but can't drink milk. Like it really depends on the person. So,
and even some people can eat hard cheese, but not soft cheese.
Exactly.
It's so nuanced like that. But yeah, just listening, eating it, figuring out how you feel, and just taking note for next time.
Yeah, 100%.
So with that, if someone were to eat dairy, what would you say if they go to the store the next time? What should they look for? There's so many different types of marketing on all these packages, and it's confusing. So if I'm like, let's say I'm someone that I want to eat cheese or milk or yogurt, what do I need to look for?
So when it comes to yogurt, this is one of the worst categories. Stay away from flavored yogurts for the most part. Yeah. Read the ingredients, because a lot of these flavored yogurts are really ice cream sundaes masquerading as yogurt. They're brutal, right? There's so much sugar added to them. So when it comes to yogurt, look for, if at all possible, organic from grass-fed cows. If you can find raw, great. If you can't, that's okay. And look for yogurt and have plain yogurt. And then because you've already done your sugar reboot that we talked about earlier, you can now add maybe some berries to it and be quite happy with your plain with yogurt that's not been sweetened. Or maybe have half a teaspoon of raw honey if you can tolerate that. Like, I mean, how much sugar you're going to be able to, just to go back to sugar for a minute, how much sugar you're going to be able to tolerate is also going to have a lot to do with your activity levels. If you're very sedentary, like you're an athlete, Chelsea, you expend a ton of energy. When you're out there, mountain biking and snowboarding and skiing, you're going to be able to, your body in some ways can use that extra energy. For those of us who are sitting at a desk, maybe more like multiple hours and aren't expending that kind of energy, it's too much of a good thing. It's just extra energy we can't get rid of. So to go back to the types of dairy, when it comes to yogurt, definitely make sure there's no sugar in there and make sure the quality of the starting quality of the materials is good. Same for things like cheese. If you can find raw milk cheeses, organic cheese, those are going to be the best.
Yeah. One thing about yogurt, though, is that it does have natural occurring sugar in it. So if someone is looking at plain yogurt and sees that there is sugar, you're never going to find yogurt with zero. No. Or any dairy, really. So
100%. And that's where your CGM comes in handy. How does your body respond to yogurt? How does your body respond to even whole milk? Like, how does your body respond to these foods? And if it's causing your blood sugar to spike, guess what? It's probably not your friend.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let's move on to number 4. And the fourth thing that we should focus on reducing or avoiding in 2024 should be commercial wheat. So can you dive into that for us?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, wheat is problematic in a million different ways. There's no doubt that in industrialized world, and frankly, almost everywhere now, we've bastardized wheat. Wheat is no longer the food that it was originally. And so the gluten in wheat is going to be damaging to your gut lining. And I'm going to say that is true for any wheat, whether it's non-GMO, organic, sourdough, the whole nine, whether you turn it into sourdough. The sourdough, the process of fermenting the wheat is helpful, certainly. But for a lot of people, wheat is going to be, for most of us, we don't want to over consume wheat. Wheat's another one of those foods that gets woven into so many processed foods. Even foods you don't think have wheat in them have wheat in them. So this goes back to what we talked about originally, which is if by eliminating things out of boxes and bags that are processed, we're going to naturally cut out a lot of this stuff. Wheat also, you're going to notice bread is going to spike your blood sugar. Like it's definitely going to drive blood sugar up. And I find, like, I'll tell you this, like I love good bread, but if I eat bread, I get this funny taste in my mouth, like I've had a lot of sugar. And it's because my body's converting it into sugar, right? So if we can avoid wheat, I think we're always better off for it. And again, eliminating wheat for a period of time to see how you feel. Are you less bloated? Do you feel less inflamed? Do you have better energy? You might drop a few pounds, like if you need to, like who knows? It's a really great experiment to run for yourself. And then the next thing about wheat is it's another one of these foods, because it's a little bit addictive. We tend to, once we start to bring it into our world, it starts to become to dominate your diet, because it's easy to have a sandwich. It's easy to have a bowl of pasta. It's easy to have toast in the morning. And it takes the place of much more nutrient dense food like protein. Right. And then to add insult to injury, we're going to have our wheat with fat. We're going to have cheese or with butter, and then with sugar like jam or honey or whatever the case may be. And now we've committed the cardinal sin of nutrition, where we've now combined fat with sugar. And that tends to grow people, and not generally in the direction they want to grow in.
You know, something though that I saw the other day that I thought was super interesting, you know, the glucose goddess on Instagram. Well, she compared eating a bowl of lentil pasta with eating a bowl of lentils, and the lentil pasta drastically spiked blood sugar. So the fact of just processing it gave her the same blood sugar spike as just regular wheat pasta, which I thought was super interesting.
For sure. The other thing you have to think about is what else is in that lentil pasta. So very often the lentil pasta has lentils, but it also has rice flour or some other kind of flour. So this goes back to our smart sweet problem, right? Is what else is in there? There was a company, and I think they're still around in Toronto, that used to make this black bean pasta, but it was only black bean, and it was fermented black beans in that pasta. Wow. And that stuff, steady Eddie blood sugar. It's unbelievable. But there are very few of these so-called healthier pastas. This goes back to like your health food problem. There are very few of these kind of healthier versions that are truly healthy. And to your point, you're now you're processing these foods. You're better off eating lentils or black beans, naturally, you know, soaked and sprouted and properly prepared. That should help you to maintain much steadier blood sugar.
Yeah. And so that kind of leads me to my next question. A lot of people, so when we're like, okay, we're going to reduce wheat, then they go to the store and they just find things that are gluten-free and automatically think that they're healthier. But when in reality, they contain ingredients that are going to cause the same issues as wheat. So maybe you want to dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this brings us to the whole question of grains, right? And I think that my biggest issue with a lot of these foods is the displacement of healthier, more nutrient-dense foods, right? So if we were to prioritize whole proteins, vegetables, and healthy fats, there really shouldn't be much room or need for a lot of these grains. Right? Whether it's millet or quinoa or rice, like all of these different foods. So I think that if you're going to eat those types of foods, if you really feel that you want them and need them, number one, look at your lifestyle. Can you afford the excess energy and burn it off? And number two, can you make it the last thing that you add to your plate so that you eat all those other foods first? And then if you still have room, which you shouldn't, right? If you still have room and you really want a little bit of that food, then go for it. And number the last thing is going back to our pro tip that we were going to add at the end of the podcast, which I'll just keep adding now because, we're going to run out of time pretty soon. And that is do that CGM experiment, wear that continuous glucose monitor for a month and have the gluten-free bread or whatever the case is, and notice how does it affect your blood sugar. But the most important thing is it displacing foods that you need for foods you really don't need that are just energy without a whole lot of nutrition.
Yeah. So if we were to sum this up, we're going to reduce our wheat intake and we're going to instead fill our plate with
vegetables, protein. Well, actually protein first. Vegetables, primarily those that grow above ground, but even those that grow below ground, because they can be more grounding. And especially for those of us who live in colder climates, like we might need some sweet potatoes, some potato, that kind of stuff, squashes, like the butternut squashes, that kind of stuff in the wintertime. And then your healthy fats, right? So prioritize those. And I would definitely encourage people to eliminate wheat for 30 days and see how you feel.
Okay, great. Well, this brings us to our last and fifth thing to eliminate in 2024 is alcohol. So
don't run away, guys.
We saved it for last, so you'd continue listening.
Yeah, that's for last. So if you're still with us, look, nirvana is to cut out alcohol. There's no RDI, recommended daily intake, for alcohol. There's no need for alcohol in our diet. It is a purely pleasure-based, hedonistic type of food. And we could even call it a food. I don't even know if we can call it a food. At the end of the day, alcohol is something that increases the workload on your liver. And your liver has a lot to deal with already. It's dealing with toxins that you're exposed to in the environment, toxins you're exposed to in your foods, things that you can't avoid. So even just from that basis, eliminating alcohol would be a benefit.
I don't know if this is true, so you can debunk this or not, but is it true that when you drink alcohol, then your body focuses on that first before other things?
That's an interesting, it's possible.
Maybe we can cut that out, but
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't actually know that. All I know is that I don't know that your body has a hierarchy of toxins necessarily. It's going to deal, maybe it deals with most toxic things first, but I don't know that I could say that alcohol is more toxic than a xenoestrogen, for example, right? All I can say is that alcohol has to be processed and detoxified by the liver. And so it just increases the work on your system. It's no good for your brain, especially if you're one of these people that's an ApoE. If you carry 1 or 2 4 alleles on your ApoE gene, then your alcohol is going to be a massive problem for your system. So eliminating alcohol is the penultimate strategy, if you will. But definitely for some people, if I'm not going to tell you that having 1 or 2 glasses of red wine a week is going to kill you. And if it brings you true joy and that's all you need to feel good, then buy the best quality wine that you can afford. Try to go with the sulfite-free, the dry things like dry farm wines, organic wines. Generally, they're imported from Europe. And you're going to just have the best. You'll have the pleasure with the least amount of damage. Having said that, if your goal is really to be uber healthy and you can see it that you could eliminate wine, then at the very least do that 30-day experiment. Cut wine out, wine and alcohol out for 30 days and see how you feel. And for some people, they feel so much better that they just don't want to go back to it. And now all we have to deal with is societal pressure, right? There's a huge pressure in society to enjoy wine with a meal or with friends because we see it, or it's not even we see it. We've created this story that to relax and unwind and to be sociable, we need wine. There's actually other things you could use.
It's funny though, because it is becoming trendy to not drink alcohol.
Yeah.
And even outside of the biohacking world, it's trendy. Even my brother, who, he's overall healthy, but he's not educated in biohacking whatsoever. And he's stopped drinking alcohol
Yeah.
because he just realized he feels so much better. Then when he does have one beer, he appreciates it a lot more and doesn't need to have then four or whatever.
Yeah.
And then a lot of celebrities now are even coming out with, alcohol-free drinks and starting companies like that, which is super interesting. And I think great for the movement of reducing alcohol. But maybe now you want to dive into some of your favorite alternatives for alcohol that can also kind of give you that same unwinding, relaxing effect.
Mm-hmm. So my favorites here there's a company called True Kava, and they've got these kava based drinks. So kava is a root. It's from Southeast Asia, I believe. And there are kava bars in certain countries where they have all different types of kava. And because kava has this relaxing kind of effect on the nervous system. So they market drinks that are kava based. It's a bit of it can be a bit of an acquired taste, but definitely these are drinks that you can sip on. You pour it into a cocktail glass or a wine glass, and you can enjoy it. And it has that same sort of effect on your system. Another category that can be helpful is there's a company called Ketone. And they make these exogenous ketone based cocktails. So he's got like a gin and tonic one. And actually, I think he might have a mojito one now. There's a couple of different flavors that they have. And these have exogenous ketones in them. So they have the benefit of being great for someone on a keto diet or who's just trying to avoid sugar. You don't have to be on a keto diet to enjoy this. Plus, they do give you a little bit of that kind of relaxing, I don't want to call it a buzz necessarily, but kind of like a more sociable effect, if you will.
Yeah.
And then you had mentioned earlier also, there's a lot of these kombuchas around now that are also, they're not necessarily going to be relaxing to the nervous system, but again, it gives you something to sip on. The only thing I'll say about kombucha is be careful of the sugar content, because some kombuchas, if they haven't been fermented long enough or properly, are going to be very high in sugar. So read your labels there as well.
Yeah. But I do think I find when I go out to a brewery or something with friends, it's an easy option where it's like the lesser of the two evils, I think.
Even if it is higher in sugar. Yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah. And something that I've also realized is that sometimes after dinner, I just want something to sip on. And is it necessarily wine that I want? And if I make a cup of tea, that kind of gives me the same, it fills that void. And I realize it's just something I want to sit, relax, and sip on. And I don't really need the wine to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where kava can also be very helpful, because kava is very relaxing. And so it can be quite good for sleep versus alcohol, which is quite crappy for your sleep. So sorry, that's my CGM monitor buzzing at me because it thinks my blood sugar is too low, but I feel good. So,
but I think another thing that has helped a lot of people stop drinking as much is they look at their HRV, and it's very clear when they look at their HRV that it's affecting their sleep, affecting their energy levels. And when they can see the number, I think it makes it more clear the effect that it's having.
100%. And you know what? Any of the things we've talked about today can affect your HRV, which is your heart rate variability, which is a measure of your recovery. And it's a measure of the balance between your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. And eating wheat, if it doesn't agree for you, eating excess sugar, eating oils and fats that are inflammatory, like all of these things are going to have a negative effect on your heart, on your recovery and your nervous system and your nervous system balance. So HRV is a great metric if you're one of these people that's wearing a tracker.
So to kind of wrap everything up, we have a couple bonus tips that we want to share. One, Nathalie has already mentioned a lot, but it's tracking your blood sugar levels. I think what we've discovered is that's one of the easiest ways to see how food is affecting you, right?
100%. So, and because even foods that you don't think have sugar might spike your blood sugar. So for sure, wearing a continuous glucose monitor is the easiest way to do that. There's a number of companies out there now that are able to give you access to these. One that I really like is called Levels, but there's others. And then definitely, so that CGM will give you great clarity and insight. But the other one, which is far less technical, that you don't need to spend a dime on other than a pen and a piece of paper, and that's keeping a food diary. So what you do for a week or 2 weeks is, and you can use an app, right? So there's apps like Chronometer. There's a whole bunch of apps. There's so many apps out there right now. But basically what you're doing is you're tracking everything that passes your lips in a day. So, and you're also writing down how you feel. So energy levels, mood, digestive symptoms, and this means bloating, pain, gas, feeling amazing,
or feeling
tired. How are you sleeping? How do you feel when you wake up in the morning? So all of these things, tracking all these things, whether it's for a week, 2 weeks, or if you have the fortitude to do it for a month. But it is amazing what you will learn on the other side of this. And because
you can then start to see the pattern, right?
Exactly. You see patterns. You also start to realize how much extra food you might be eating that you don't realize, or how much sugar. Like the benefit of using the apps is they will break it down for you. They'll tell you how much sugar, how much fat, how much carb, how much protein. And what I find a lot of my clients recognize is they're not eating nearly enough protein. They're getting way too many carbs. There's too much omega-6. There's not enough omega-3. Like it's crazy the amount of information you can get just from tracking your food and drink for a short period of time.
And even if you eat a meal and you still feel hungry after, that's also a good indicator.
Or an hour, or you're hungry an hour later.
Or an hour later, yeah. Okay, and then our last bonus tip that we actually haven't even touched on at all in this episode is to deal with your emotions.
Yes. So this was a big one. And Chelsea and I were chatting before recording the episode, and both of us were like, yes, that is so big. And this is where, we think that we forget that our emotional state has so much to do with our cravings and what we think are our needs and habits. So whether it's stress, sadness, anxiety, depression, these are all things that are going to affect your intake of food and vice versa. And your food could also affect them back. So getting a handle on thinking about when you're eating something, or when you feel that you have to have something, diving into, why do I need this? Am I feeling sad? Am I feeling angry? Am I feeling stressed? And then accessing resources that can help us to deal with those feelings, so that we're not eating our feelings, which is a big expression. I think is a big one. And then, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention sleep, because if you're sleep deprived, not only is that going to affect your cravings, it's also going to affect your ability to balance your emotions. So, we wanted to keep this episode simple. And the challenge with that is we are complex, right? And everything that we do is going to lead back into, like, all those inputs are going to affect our outputs. So we can't separate really the sleep, the emotions, the food, and the cravings. All of those things, they're all very intertwined. But if you start by those 5 things that we talked about, and you're aware that these other things can also affect them, then you can start to really get some insight and some clarity around what is it that you need to work on. It's a little bit like what you talked about before, Chelsea, and that is, do you need to see a nutritionist, or do you need to get someone to help you emotionally regulate yourself? Because, for someone who has an eating disorder, for example, they need to learn to emotionally regulate before they go to the nutritionist, because the nutritionist might just feed the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's just comforting to know that it's not your willpower or you need to be
Mhm.
stronger to be able to do this. It's like, instead of being like, oh, I just need more willpower in 2024, it's more like, no, address the root cause. And once you address the root cause, you realize you have enough willpower. You don't need more.
Yeah, and that's such a strong point, and I think that people can be very hard on themselves and be very
Mm-hmm.
judgmental, and there's a lot of negative self-talk and beating yourself up because you didn't stick to your plan. Have some kindness and grace for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and be willing to ask the questions and then reach out for help to the right person to give you the help that you need, and don't just beat yourself up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do be aware that, as Chelsea said, it's not always like, for some people it might be willpower, but for so many people there's so much more running under the surface here. So doing these things and working on improving your diet can really move you into a space where you're dealing with other, maybe bigger issues in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that wraps up our episode.
I think so too. Chelsea, it's been amazing having you here today. I'm really looking forward to our series this year. I think this is going to be awesome. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to say.
No, I think maybe if you just want to quickly recap the 5 things that we went through.
Yeah. So, and this is going to be like the 4-second recap. So we talked about what was the first thing we talked about? Oh yeah, processed seed oils and vegetable oils, processed oils, which leads to processed foods. We talked about sugar. We talked about wheat. We talked about dairy, and then we talked about alcohol. And then at the end, we gave a few extra pro tips. We talked about the CGMs, the food diary, the emotions, the sleep, that kind of thing. So, net, guys, I definitely am not advocating that you do all of these things starting tomorrow. Pick one, either based on what you know to be your nemesis. Is sugar your thing? Is processed foods your thing? Like, what is the thing that you feel is holding you back the most? Pick that one thing, work on that one thing, and then maybe move on to the next one. The biggest mistake we all make, and I see people making, is trying to do it all, especially this time of year. I'm going to do everything perfectly, and within a week, we've dove into a bag of whatever it is because we've just thrown in the towel. So be kind to yourself. Pick one thing. Stick to that one thing for at least a week. If you can do a week, you can do 2. If you can do 2, do a third. If you can do that, you can do a month. See how you feel, and then think about, do I need to stick with this? Do I need to try the next thing? Whatever the case may be. And I think that's about it. I think, look, we can keep talking for a really long time. So I think what I'm going to do is invite people to connect with me on Instagram at Nathalie Nidham. You can find me there. If you want to really kind of hang out with me and do a bunch of, chat and do live Q&As and stuff, my Mighty Networks community is the best place to connect with me, because I do live Q&As in there. We invite experts. I'll be running programs out of Mighty Networks. So to get information about that, just go to natnidham.com, and there's a tab at the top that is BSP Community, and you can find out information about how to join. This will air January 12th. The price for BSP Community, that Mighty Networks community, will be increasing Feb 1. So if you join now, you get grandfathered in at the current rate, and your rate will never go up for as long as you're a member. So I think that's about it, Miss Chelsea. I don't think I don't think there's anything else we need to say today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, listeners. If you're still here, hopefully you are, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.